So we've been hearing a lot of inquiries about the UK business expansion visa.
Yeah.
Is this a new visa category?
So based on UK legislation, yes, it's a fairly new category. It came into place in early April 2022, which runs in line with the UK tax year. You may remember the old sole representative visa.
Right.
The category was essentially put in place to replace the old sole representative. It falls under a category called global mobility, which is 5 subcategories, of which the business expansion is one. So it's in its almost 3rd year. So yeah, relatively new, UK speaking.
Very good. So the category is in place to allow businesses to expand in the UK, right?
Correct.
What are the basic requirements we're looking at?
So yeah, firstly, that's correct. So the category is in place for individuals who are business owners or who work within businesses that currently exist outside of the UK and are looking to expand that footprint into the UK by either sending a director or a manager or a senior level person to represent that business and roll that business out into the UK. Some of the main criteria or the base level criteria are that the business needs to have been operational outside of the UK for a minimum of 3 years before expanding. And the person that's going to represent that business in the UK needs to have been attached or working for that business for at least 12 months prior to applying. One of the other category requirements are that in that first 12 months in the UK, you need to pay yourself a minimum salary within the UK of £48,500.
Okay, that's the minimum, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And that's not a lump sum amount. It's a
Right.
salary which is either drawn monthly, quarterly,
Okay.
or however you choose to do it, but within the UK. And that payment can actually come essentially from the non-UK entity initially until that facility is set up in the UK to initiate the salary payment.
Very good. Okay, so we want to talk about the eligible dependents in the application, right?
Yes.
So can applicants include their family members?
So 100%. So that's actually a good question. So the first thing to think about is once the initial expansion visa holder receives their residence card, so that initial 12 months, once that's granted and the sponsorship license in place, you can actually include 5 expansion worker category workers on that sponsorship license.
Okay.
Meaning that once the initial expansion worker is in the UK, we can bring 4 other applicants over to actually help expand that business. Now, as the main applicant, as the main expansion worker visa holder, you can include family members, which are a spouse
Okay.
or unmarried partner. But for an unmarried application, you need to show that you've lived together and prove that cohabitation has existed.
Like a common law partner.
Exactly, for at least 2 years, or a married partner, obviously, would be a marriage certificate. And then in terms of minor dependents or children dependents, any children under the age of 18 can be included.
Okay. Okay, so Sheldon, there's so many questions about how long is the expansion visa valid for?
Sure.
Can you tell us more about that?
So yeah, the expansion visa, because of the fact that essentially it's to expand the business, the UK have tried to take a more pro-business approach with the global mobility category. And to do that, they're essentially giving you an initial 12 months. So the first expansion worker visa is granted for 12 months with the ability to then extend that for a further 12 months from within the UK. Which then often people will ask what happens after that second 12 months or at the end of 24 months. What we're then able to do, and we can do this for our clients, and we've done it for many, is we essentially upgrade the sponsor's license from an expansion worker license to a skilled worker license, which allows again the applicant to switch in country from the expansion worker visa to the skilled worker visa, maintain their residence, and that actually leads to both indefinite leave to remain and naturalization.
Very, very good way to
A very efficient way.
very efficient way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a very interesting question. Yeah.
Yes.
How long will the process take? Because as we all know, these kind of applications does take a lot of time.
It does. It's a fair amount of lifting, so we try and minimize that amount of lifting by taking the drafted legislation, digesting it, and making it as palatable as possible for our clients. So yes, it's a lot of heavy lifting, but it's doable, and we'll help you with that.
Yeah, well,
process.
that's the reason why we're here, right? To help them.
Exactly. A lot of hand-holding involved,
True.
but we get it done. So how long does it take? Perhaps it helps if I tell you what the process looks like.
Sure.
So initially we have to incorporate the business in the UK, and you're looking at about 2 to 3 days, working days, to have that incorporation done. We do that directly with Companies House in the UK, and it also helps to show a UK footprint in place for a later stage of the application. Once that company is registered, we then move on to the sponsorship license of the application, or the sponsorship license portion of the application. That requires, probably, other than the visa application itself, most of the heavy lifting. We'll have to put business plans in place for that. We'll need to put market research in place for that. We'll need to show an organogram for that. So again, with that process, we've got templates we use. We make it very digestible. Clients tend to know their businesses better than we do, but we're able to fit that into a template quite accurately.
Yeah, and we have pretty amazing team as well, and experts
to help. A fantastic team. And it's
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
True.
So sponsorship license, then we're able to grant the applicant their certificate of sponsorship. Once that's granted, we move on to the visa application stage, which takes about 10 to 15 working days once submitted. So we like to say all in, with all 4 processes staggered, you're looking at about 10 to 12 weeks to receive your residence. So fairly expeditious when it comes to European or UK residents.
Right.
So yeah, very streamlined process.
Very good. So most of our clients ask about, success stories and success rates we have in the company. Can you share a little bit of our wonderful stories to our viewers?
Sure. I mean, we've had several, so let me just think of some recent ones.
Yes.
We recently had a family, a North American family actually, who resided in the UAE. So they were a Canadian family.
Yeah.
They had children who were, if I remember correctly, 15 and 13. And they were actually looking at boarding school in the UK. So for the children, the parents were initially going to stay in the UAE, and the children were going to go independent, or as independently as minors can go. And they looked at the category, and we were actually looking at the initial, what used to be the tier 4. We were looking at the student visa category, obviously minor category for the children. After several conversations, it came to pass that the wife and the husband were actually partners in a company that was incorporated both in Canada and the UAE, and I think it had been incorporated for around 9 years, if I remember correctly. And the wife was actually intending on spending extended time in the UK. So rather than the children going independently, what we did was we made the wife the main applicant on a business expansion category, which allowed the children then to be added as dependents. So that had 2 effects. Essentially, it allowed the children to then have an expeditious route to indefinite leave to remain in the UK, so permanent residence, which you wouldn't get through the tier 4 student category. So it also has an effect directly on the fees associated. So when you go to an institution, obviously each institution has its own rates, but as a UK resident at the time of application, they also had access to beneficial rates at the institution of choice. So number 1, it helped them incorporate a business in the UK, which was expanding their footprint. Number 2, it gave the children the ability to qualify sooner for indefinite leave to remain and thereafter citizenship. And number 3, it gave them the ability to access beneficial tertiary rates, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
So that was a recent winner. Another one we had was a South African family who had actually had, the wife was, if I remember correctly, they were looking at an innovator route, but they were having issues with an endorsement. So one of the categories in the UK, different category, requires an endorsement. So, and a certain innovator category.
Right.
They ran a restaurant franchise in South Africa, which obviously isn't categorized as innovative. So they were struggling with the endorsement portion of the application. They came to us, looked at different things. We actually looked at an ancestry visa, but there was a great grandparent born in the UK, so that was too complicated. Yeah. So we looked at the expansion route. So long story short, they had a business in South Africa that had been in operation for 18 years.
Wow.
They could meet the salary requirement. It was actually lower than the salary they were drawing in South Africa at the time. We were able to attach the spouse and the children, and they relocated about 2 months ago. So another successful case, and we were able to adapt within the legislation.
Yeah, well, I guess, Sheldon, it's very important that we understand what the client's needs are.
Absolutely.
And then they come to us with with their whatever they know, right? But then because we're experts and we're professionals,
exactly.
and we advise them what they need to
Absolutely.
do.
So exactly right, Jim. So the client will often arrive at or in front of us, or whether they come to our office or it's via a phone call, they generally have a broad idea of what they're looking at. So because we know the legislation so well, we're able to narrow that down pretty quickly within an hour or two, or maybe 2 or 3 conversations, and come up with the best category suitable.
And the suitable option.
Yeah, and there is a bit of, like we often say, there's a bit of wiggle room within the legislation.
True.
So we make that wiggle room a little wider, and we make sure it suits the client. So that's 2 recent ones I can think of. We could probably go on for a while, but those are 2 recent.
Yeah, we'll update them later on when we have a lot of successful stories later on. So you mentioned that clients can qualify for the ILR and the naturalization process.
Correct.
I mean, how does that process look like?
So yes, so there's a little bit of nuance there in what that process looks like. So with the expansion visa, those first 2 years don't accrue to leading up to indefinite leave to remain.
This is a very good point. Yeah.
Exactly. So you can actually switch from expansion visa to skilled workers sooner than after the initial 24 months. We've had clients do it as soon as 6 months into the process. So what that process looks like is once you've switched from the expansion to the skilled worker category, your time, and that includes the dependent's time, starts accruing for indefinite leave to remain and thereafter naturalization. To qualify for that, the main applicant, so the main visa holder, must not spend more than 183 days a year outside of the UK over the 5 years leading to indefinite leave to remain. Okay. If the dependent children or spouse or unmarried partner do, that's irrelevant. The residence requirements are based on the main visa holder, which is quite important. Yeah. So it's important to choose who the main applicant is. True. Because that person is going to be required to stay in the UK for the extended amount of time. So for indefinite leave to remain, 183 days a year. You then hold indefinite leave to remain for a further year, and then you can apply to naturalize. When you apply to naturalize, it's a slight nuance there as well. They assess the previous 5 years from there, and there's a total of 450 days that cannot have been exceeded in the 5 years before naturalizing. So essentially how you think of it is no more than 90 days per year in the preceding 5 years to naturalize, and no more than 183 days a year in the preceding 5 years to get indefinite leave to remain. So slightly different qualifying criteria. But again, we can help you with that during the process, and you can check in with us annually around the residence requirements, and we keep our clients updated.
So a lot of people are under the impression that the business expansion visa is cancelled.
Yes.
We both know, and we all know that it's not.
Correct.
Is there any reason behind that, Sheldon?
So there is a reason for that. I mean, as we said at the beginning, it essentially replaced what was formerly the sole representative visa. So some of that legislation does overlap, so it sounds fairly similar. There are various differences between the 2 categories, like you don't have to be, for the sole representative, you couldn't be a majority shareholder. For the business expansion, that's not an issue. The English language requirement was in place for the sole representative. It's not for the business expansion. So because it mirrors the fact that you're expanding a business into the UK, many clients have obviously looked at backdated legislation and seen that the sole rep is now cancelled. So they're not incorrect, but they're incorrect in that the category changed and business expansion is very much alive.